Welcome to episode 115 of The Sleeper and the Bust. I'm Justin Mason, joined, as always on Sundays, by Jason Collette. Jason, how you doing, my friend?
Hey, you said 115, but we're actually 1015 unless we're traveling back in time. And I had a few, fewer wrinkles and fewer gray hairs that I'm hiding under this beanie cap here as I'm trying to stay warm. But yeah, we're episode 1015. So it's been to freak out and be like, damn, this is an old show. I'm not listening to this.
Yeah, it's been such a long time since we recorded on Sundays that I guess I missed a few episodes. Joining us today is a special guest. We have Kevin Hasting of the On the Wire podcast, former TGFBI overall champion. Kevin, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Justin. It's amazing to be here.
It's always a pleasure to talk to you, my friend. Got to hang out with you in Arizona at First Pitch, which was a fantastic experience, as it always is. Want to remind people where you reach on social media, and then kind of talk about what you do.
Sure. It's pretty simple. I'm at Hasting Kevin on Twitter, as we still know it. For the moment, anyway. I am a co-host of On the Wire podcast, as you mentioned, with Adam Howe over on the Pitcher List Podcast Network. It's a fab-based podcast in season. We record as late as possible on Saturday evenings and get it out as soon as possible early Sunday morning in season. In the off season, we're doing some other subjects throughout the year, and even keeping it going more often this off season. We went to every other week last year. This year we're doing at least weekly and even having a couple bonus episodes here and there. And I do a in-season fab article at Pitcher List along with that in-season, and that's about it. Just love talking baseball.
Yep, and you're a great person to talk baseball with. I don't have this on the rundown, but one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you is because you told me something really cool about, if for those of you who play in NFBC, about the Rockies schedule. So give people a little bit of rundown there. I know it was on the rundown, but I'm sure you're prepared because you got all the info in that brain of yours.
Yeah, this is something I stumbled across in May of 2022, and the MLB schedule was very gracious to those of us that were rostering Rockies players. We know about their tremendous splits home and away due to Coors Field, and for most of the rest of 2022 at that point, the Rockies were either at home or on the road for an entire weekly scoring period. That made it really easy to even sit CJ Cron in weekly leagues as I played out the rest of the season. So I went ahead and looked at 2023 to see how that was going to work out this year, and it doesn't. If you're in a weekly league, I'm not advocating drafting any Rockies players, even CJ Cron, for example. I believe it's week 9 before they're at home all week. It's very few times. Now, in a lot of weekly leagues, those would be trading leagues as well. So I would look at trading for them at the trade deadline. I believe 3 of the last 4 weeks of the season, they are at home all week. Head-to-head leagues, that would be great for playoffs. And then NFBC, as you brought up, that's a completely different story. You can get 80 of the 81 home Rockies games without using a single road game for Rockies players. Now, it means you're probably using a roster spot for that. Got to be careful in that situation. Only one of those periods is a Monday through Thursday with only 2 starts. So even if you would sit them that week, you get 78 of the 81 home games without using a single road start. So just something to keep in mind when drafting Rockies this season.
That's a huge advantage for those of you playing NFBC. Obviously, if you're playing in a weekly league on Yahoo or on ESPN or any other site, like, not a huge advantage. I do like that if you're one of those people that you play in that home league, that ESPN home league or Yahoo home league, and you know you're going to make the playoffs, then yeah, maybe you want to invest in some of those Rockies hitters for those playoffs. to make sure you've got kind of a little bit of distinct advantage once playoff time comes around. But for those of us playing NFBC, being able to play 80 of 81 home games without having to play any away games is huge. And I've already taken advantage of it because you told me about it in Arizona. And I was all like, oh, great. I'm moving up some Rockies up my board now in NFBC leagues.
Yeah, it's pretty nice. The one guy that doesn't do as bad on the road and goes very late, and he's the one we were talking about when we were in Arizona, is Charlie Blackmon. And I think it's just because he's been around so long, he knows how to make those adjustments. He's a veteran in that situation.
Yeah. Jason, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, the weekly, I was just looking at it while you guys were talking, the weekly for the weekly league players, that's where it gets tough because you know, Kevin, you're right. The first full week at home for a scoring period doesn't happen until the week of May 22nd. And then there's a week off, and then there's another full week at home. And then they kind of go into this pattern of I'm home, I'm out, I'm home, I'm out. They got this really sweet stretch between June 23rd and July 2nd where they're home, but they also have 2 days off in that homestand. And then they go to that scatter pattern again until you get until the end of August. And then August and September is nice because they have all but one period that they're home the entire time. So as you guys were saying, that's really where it comes into play. So, you know, for NFBC, it was great to get brought up in Arizona. And, you know, people that were there have already been applying it, Justin being one of them, to their drafts on NFBC for that purpose. But it's one of those things, you know, if you are a weekly or a bi-weekly lineup or twice weekly lineup league, it's something to pay attention to.
All right, let's talk some news and notes quickly before we get into our kind of topic. And our main topic is going to be some players with big differences between their minimum pick and maximum pick on NFBC, and some interesting names on that list. But it's hot stove season, and we had a few trades go down and some non-tenders that went down in the last few days. So I want to kind of speak on them. Let's start with the trades. Kyle Farmer gets traded from the Reds to the Twins. Kevin, do we care?
Yes, absolutely. First of all, we're going from Great American Small Park to Minneapolis, which isn't nearly as nice a park for home runs, obviously. And second of all, playing time. Right now, Kyle Farmer's probably the utility infielder, and that's before we know if the Twins are going to attempt to re-sign Correa. We know his teammates are advocating for that at the moment, or bring in one of the other big free agent shortstops. So this is really interesting to me in DC's. I think his ADP is in the 390s, and I expect this to drop a lot. And if it does, I may be interested very late in DC's as things play out throughout the season. He could fall into more playing time, but in Fab leagues right now, I think he's pretty much undraftable.
Jason, what are your thoughts on Kyle Farmer moving to Minnesota?
It's actually a little weird for him. The expected home runs, if you look at last year, the expected home runs actually bump him up a little bit in target field for whatever, I guess his extreme pull, I'm going to hit it right down the line, actually worked out well for him. So he had 8 expected home runs for target field. You know, he's another high in contact. The Twins as a whole finished the league average for strikeout rate. You know, I think that comes down to, you know, the fact that Miguel Sano wasn't in the lineup for a lot of it, and Luis Arias and his high contact ability was in it quite a bit. But, you know, they were 22% as a lineup, and that's right about where Kyle Farmer hits. And he's essentially a cheaper Gio Urshela. They traded Urshela away, which we'll talk about in a minute. Similar profile in that they can both, air quotes, play the left side of the infield. I would say Farmer is maybe a half click better defender, and it's a insurance policy. If they decide they're not going to get in this high price shortstop market, they don't get any of these guys back because what's currently on the roster, Farmer would be the best shortstop of that group, but that would be a gigantic decline from the defense that they got out of Correa for this 1 year too. So I agree with Kevin that I do see him being a utility option there. Perhaps if he is going to get a lot of playing time, it would be at third base. because I'm still not sold on Arias being a first baseman. I could see him being a DH. He has all the defensive limitations in the world. They could use him at DH and then move Miranda over to first base and then free up third base for Kyle Farmer. Because they certainly let Urshela play that all year. And again, they're very similar in their defensive profile. So that's how I could see it shaking out.
Yeah, I think that would be the best way for it to shake out. As the team's currently constructed, I tend to agree, though, that I think they will address some sort of shortstop. I don't know if it's going to be Correa. I don't know that they want to invest that kind of money again. Though, I mean, it worked out just fine. I just don't know that. I think Correa wants a long-term deal this time around, and I don't know that the Twins are the team that's going to give that to him. I hate this move for Kyle Farmer. I do think he's going to be kind of a utility guy in a worse park. He's pretty much off my board, I think. I mean, I guess if he falls super, super late into DC in a draft and hold kind of league, it makes a little bit of sense, but I think at this point, you've got to project him for around 400 plate appearances, and he just doesn't have the offensive profile to make up for those lack of plate appearances. He's not going to hit a ton of home runs. He's not going to steal a ton of bases. And so he really needs volume to have value in fantasy, and I just don't know that he is going to have that, especially when they've got guys like Nick Gordon, Royce Lewis. You would hope that Lewis is going to be healthy coming into the season and that he'll finally get a full-time shot at some point if they don't sign Correa.
I don't think Lewis. The last thing I read on Lewis is that he is not going to be ready for the start of the season.
Oh, okay.
The knee rehab. I remember seeing something at one point, but that's going to be an issue for that. I don't think he's ready, and so he's going to be slow out of camp. But I do recall seeing something a few weeks ago that wasn't going to be a possibility.
All right, well, there you go. That, gives maybe Farmer an opportunity. And I mean, sometimes these things just work themselves out in terms of like having a spot. Guys get hurt, guys just fall off completely. But I do expect the Twins to make more moves other than just this Farmer deal. So, speaking of the Twins, they traded away Gio Urshela over to the Angels. Jason, what are your thoughts on Urshela playing for the Los Angeles Angels?
I mean, it gives them some more. One of the problems we saw with the Angels this past season is they had no depth. And once they lost their guys to injury, there was a big gap. They had a haves and haves not roster. And when Rendon was having his issues and Trout, it's like we saw some guys get more playing time than they really needed to get. So that was a problem with things. And so, getting Urshela over there gives them some insurance if they have when Rendon has another problem with injury. So it gives them some insurance there. I don't believe for a minute that he's there as the starting shortstop. I know that's what the depth charts say right now, but that can't be real. I mean, if you've watched Urshela lately, he's pretty good at getting to things hit at him. But I cannot believe that's the solution for shortstop. If it is, I'm bumping their pitchers down. I just don't see how that's going to play out. But, to me, that's where it comes down. I think he's one of these, like, offense for fantasy purposes. He's like a safe late vet type of guy where he should get some playing time with the Angels, a decent volume of it. And he's got a low risk type of thing. But, if the Angels find themselves competitive, somehow, the Orioles did it this year, so anything's possible, right? If the Angels find themselves somehow competitive, I don't see how they carry Urshela's limitations in the field on a everyday basis.
Yeah, it's kind of a weird move. What are your thoughts, Kevin? Urshela in Los Angeles, any interest there?
Yeah, I like this a little bit. I think if they were putting a starting lineup out there today, he probably is starting at shortstop a lot of the time, probably not every day. I think it's insurance for Anthony Rendon being injured again. Jeff Zimmerman tweeted this morning he thinks this means that Rendon might be moving to first base. So it's pretty interesting to me. I agree with Jason. There probably will be playing time one way or another for him. And again, it's a pretty big ballpark upgrade. I know ballpark factors are very volatile, but their 3-year rolling average on StatCast has them as the 4th best ballpark for home runs, and ESPN for 2022 had him in the same spot. So pretty nice upgrade for ballpark there as well.
Yeah, I mean, I guess he can play shortstop. I don't know that he's a very good shortstop. He's a much better defensive third baseman, which would make a lot of sense about Rendon moving to first base. But then where does Jared Walsh play? And is this an indictment of Jared Walsh's kind of recovery from thoracic outlet surgery? And like Paul and I talked about recently, there's just no real data on what thoracic outlet surgery does for hitters. We have a little bit of data on pitchers, and it's not great data, but we have really no idea of like how Jared Walsh is going to recover from this. Is this like Tommy John surgery where for pitchers it's a really devastating issue, and for hitters they tend to come back just fine? I don't know. I don't think anybody really knows. So maybe this is an indictment of Jared Walsh. Maybe they decide Jared Walsh is going to go to the outfield if he is healthy, which would seem a little weird. But right now, I think they have Mickey Moniak scheduled to play left field. So like, I don't know. I have kind of given up on trying to figure out what the Angels are doing or think they are doing, because I don't think they really understand.
It's the final year of Ohtani, man. This is, to me, it's like if they could go out and go find somebody. If a Carlos Correa situation came up where they didn't get the multi-year deal that they wanted, but they're good with a 1 year high, go do it. This is your year. And if they've already said they're not going to trade Ohtani, then try to do something this year with this squad. I mean, when you've got the talent that they have on paper, they have the potential to be. They went out and got Tyler Anderson, so that's like a step. That's a baby step, but it's a step in the direction of doing that. But to me, it's like if they could go out there and find a free agent that is willing to get a 1 year pillow contract, this is it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you kind of try to load up as much as you can and see what you can do. You got 2 generational talents, and only one of them after 2023. So I guess I don't know, man. This just seems like such a mess of an organization.
I think the pillow contract is the only way it happens as well. Yeah. Even though they've announced that they are not trading Ohtani, at least in this offseason, if there is a pending sale, they're not going to add a long-term contract to this team.
Yeah, I can't imagine that they do, but like what kind of guy is getting a pillow contract this year? Like
Gio Urshela.
Yeah, exactly. Like just looking at like the free agency kind of like guys, like Elvis Andrus, like he's a shortstop that's probably going to get a 1 year deal somewhere. But
wait, Andrus is a free agent?
Yeah.
Well, the best part about it, he's a free agent. Oakland's still paying him because remember that contract, that player option.
Oh, that's right.
Some of that got kicked in because that was the thing I remember reading is there was something about Andrus and that his contract, if he hit a certain amount of playing time, he became the next option guaranteed. Maybe he fell short and that's why he's a free agent. But I remember hearing something towards the end of the season that he was eligible. Like if he hit a certain plateau, then another year kicked in and Oakland was going to have to pay him.
Yeah. I mean, I can't imagine any of the big 4 shortstops, Dansby Swanson, Trey Turners, Andrew Bogarts, or Correa taking 1 year deals.
Yeah,
all those guys are getting long-term deals. At worst, they're getting the deal that Correa got last year, which is like a big 3-year deal with opt-outs. So like your options become Jose Iglesias, Elvis Andrus, Willie Castro, Aledmus Diaz. Like those guys aren't making your team that much better. So I mean that Rendon contract is just atrocious right now for them. Moving on, Eliser Hernandez was traded to the Mets from the Marlins. The Marlins have a ton of pitching depth, so they have guys to spare. Jason, do you think that Hernandez has a chance to break that rotation in New York?
No, he's not a starting pitcher. He's a reliever. Yeah. He is a reliever. He should not be in that rotation. We saw news a couple of weeks ago that they're considering putting Seth Lugo in the rotation, and perhaps that's the role that Eliser Hernandez could. He's not a starting pitcher. He has a great slider. If I were running the Mets, I take him and I was like, look, I would be like, throw that pitch more, a lot more. Stop using your fastball the way you're using because it's getting crushed up. The problem was he had no off speed at all, and you could just stack a lefty and just crush it. with him. And now he's developed somewhat of a changeup, but the fastball has mostly been garbage. But if he's throwing the slider a lot and keeping guys looking slider, suddenly the fastball looks a little better for that. So if I'm the Mets, I take him, I put him in the bullpen, tell him to throw a bunch of sliders until his arm falls off. Keep him out of the rotation. He's not a starting pitcher.
Kevin, any interest in Hernandez and even in like a DC?
Not really. I agree with everything Jason said. If he does throw the slider more, and it seems to be working, because even the slider wasn't as good this past season as it has been in the past. But I think I know he's going in like the 600s in DCs, but I think there's similar guys, relievers that aren't going to start, probably not going to get any save opportunities. But if you're using them for ratios and a few strikeouts, I think there's other guys I would prefer. Yeah, I don't have much interest in Hernandez here.
Yeah, I don't either. I think this is more about the Mets trying to kind of cheaply acquire relievers because, as mentioned on previous episodes that I've done with Paul, the reliever market sucks. The reliever market's really, really bad. And so there are going to be guys that are traded that were either, former swingmen or former starters that are going to be moved into bullpen roles on teams, especially when they're kind of cost controlled like Hernandez is. So I think it's a good move for the Mets, but as far as fantasy goes, probably doesn't have very much value. The last trade we'll talk about before we get to the four non-tender guys I want to talk about real quick is Kevin Newman was traded from the Pirates to the Reds. Kevin, do you think Kevin is got some extra value moving out of PNC over to Great America Small Park?
I thought I was going to be more excited about this move than I am now that I've taken a look at Kevin Newman's past few seasons. He just doesn't hit the ball hard enough, even for Great American Small Park. I don't think he will get the playing time. So if he's there in DCs, I could see taking him really late as a guy that I'm hoping I don't need, but if I do, he's going to get me the plate appearances. But other than 2019, when we know the ball was the huge factor, his home run per fly ball rate is under 3% every season since. And his hard hit metrics, under 30%. And what's funny about this is his hard hit percentage, although it's slightly, has been higher every year since 2019, but still bad. It's just that's how bouncy the ball was in 2019. So I'm not as excited about this as I thought I might be, but there will be playing time there, I believe, if he's going late enough in draft and hold leagues. Jason,
you got any interest in Kevin Newman?
I have slight interest in a draft and hold format with him, only because it could be a sneaky source of steals. It's like, 2019, obviously throw that away. And he's had a lot of batting average variance over the past couple of years, something like an 85-point swing in his batting average. So it's like batted ball luck is where the value, but he still has, his home to first speed's pretty good. And so like he has the potential to be a double-digit stolen base guy. So, in a late format, in draft and hold where you're just looking to plug bodies towards as guys fall apart, he's somebody that I would be interested in taking very late.
Yeah, I think that's kind of where he probably belongs, is late in the DC, because he could be like a 7-homer, 12, 13 stolen base guy that's going to kind of give you volume. And, one of the things in those draft and hold leagues is that you need volume. You need guys who are going to play all the time, and you don't want him necessarily as a starter, but injuries happens and you can't pick these guys up. Pick guys who emerge off the waiver wire. So Kevin Newman is one of those guys that I think will become a very popular late round pick in DCs. The problem is, if he becomes so popular moving from PNC to Great America Ballpark, that he may actually end up not being worth where he's going. We saw on Twitter after the trade, some really good names, big names in the industry talking about how, hey, they had already been invested. James Anderson is the one that's come to mind. they'd already invested in Newman a few times, and they're really glad that they got him, at such a huge discount. And I just worry that pushes him up over actually better players. And so I think it all kind of depends. If he's going outside top 500 picks, great. But I think he's going to start moving inside of that. And if he does, do I really care that much? I don't know that I do. Let's move on and talk about some of these non-tendered guys. And we don't have to go too deep into them because we have no idea where they're necessarily going to be playing. But I just want your guys' thoughts on whether or not you'd be drafting them at their current price today. And we have to start with the guy I got to kind of do a mea culpa on. Paul and I were talking about Cody Bellinger and his potential to be non-tender, I think, on the last episode. And I said, I just don't think the Dodgers are going to non-tender him. I just would be very, very surprised. The guy who, recently won an MVP award, that you let him go. I understand that it's, he has not produced anywhere close to what his contract was going to be, but I just couldn't imagine they'd let him out into the market like that. And I was absolutely wrong. They non-tendered him, and he is now a free agent. Kevin, would you draft Cody Bellinger today, knowing that he doesn't have a team right now, but he's sure to at some point?
I don't think so. Not without knowing the landing spot and seeing something. Typically, I don't like it when myself or anybody else says, "Oh, we have to see something first." Typically, that's too late. But Bellinger, what he's done, I mean, even in his amazing 2019, he got progressively worse as the season went on. He won that MVP by the end of May and then got worse. For the rest of the season, he was still good, but he was more like a 280, 35 home run hitter for a season the rest of the way that year. Great season, not an MVP season. And then each season since then, we've seen it, and we know it's probably at least somewhat injury related. That's the only thing that makes him intriguing at all to me, is if it has all been due to injury and he gets healthy, and a new team can help him figure this out. There is the change of scenery thing. Typically, I like with players in this situation, but if the Dodgers can't figure it out and help you figure it out, I don't know who can.
Jason, any chance you are drafting Cody Bellinger, currently going at pick 202 on an FBC?
Yeah, so that's where at that price, sure, put me in. I mean, I see he's got a min of 151, high of 245, or a low of 245 rather. So at that price, Kevin made a good point about, sometimes I've got to see, people want to see something before they do something. Well, again, that could be too late with this, because where he ends up could immediately impact his value. To reiterate one of Kevin's points, from June 1st of 2019 until the end of this past season, his triple slash line is 218, 299, 423. That's not MVP. That's not even replacement level talent for an outfielder. That's bad. Simply put, I mean, yeah, the 68 home runs are cool, but 31 out of 37 stolen bases, that's cool. And he still has that speed, but the 299 on base percentage, that's not getting there. I mean, you look at all the the beauties of StatCast page. You can go there and look at the trends in the areas. It's like he has last 4 years, his expected weighted on base average was 99, 85, and it was 6 and 10. The last 2 years. His XBA was a single digit percentile the past 2 years. And so, yeah, it got bad. And the change of scenery thing, I believe it applies here, just like I'm going to say the same thing about Dom Smith when we get there too. The expectations for Bellinger have always been sky high. Him winning that MVP early didn't calm any of those down. And now it's just been a matter. You look at how things have gone for him as far as plate distance. It just seems like the old NBA adage with John Stark: shooters shoot their way out of slumps. Well, he's tried to swing his way out of a slump, and it hasn't gotten any better. And so perhaps if Bellinger can find a market where the spotlight of expectations aren't so bright on him, and he doesn't have 15 media members in his face reminding him how much he's struggling, perhaps that can happen for him. Now it's just a matter of who's going to want to pay, because the representation is going to want to get a huge deal for him. But you look at that, what we just said, over 1,562 plate appearances. He's been a 93 WRC plus. He can still play defense. He still has all the tools, but we don't know what's happening from the neck up. And so at the current market price, outside of the top 200, I'm still willing to pay for the upside. But that said, it's, it could be a flop because if this is if this is the new Cody Bellinger, there's a lot of that out there. I can go find much safer options, but outside the top 200, I'm in, because remember this time last year, we were having the same conversation as an industry, and he was still going well within the top 100. If memory serves me correct. Mm-hmm. And I was out then, but because I remember Vlad Sedler talking, like he was one of the guys inside the top 100. This is going to be, and there were a lot of people on board with it and justifying that pick. So if you thought that he was top 100 potential last year, you should be comfortable taking him outside the top 200 and just move your comfort level up there. But if he gets if he lands in the right situation, he could have a significant ADP bump. So you early drafters, if he's still sitting out there, that would be round 15. We get if you're in a 12-team format, 15 times 12 is 180. So if he's still sitting out there after the 15th round, I wouldn't hesitate to jump. If you're in a 15-team format, that's going to put you roughly in the 12th round, math-wise. Same, 12th, 13th round. So, again, wouldn't hesitate to pull the trigger in that case, but I'm not getting ahead early right now until we see where he lands. Like if he did that 1-year pillow contract with the Angels, it's still Los Angeles. It's still the same people. The state media right now, they may not all be there, but it's still going to be multiple places. He just needs a good place where he can, focus on him and not of what he used to be. There's still a lot of good in him, and maybe Ben Kenobi can save him.
Yeah, I'm probably still out. I kind of tend to agree with Kevin that I don't like when people say, even though I say it all the time, that I want to see something from him before I'm willing to draft him again. But having no idea where he's going to land, though he could end up back in Los Angeles. This would be perfect for the Angels, right? Improve that outfield defense a little bit. You don't have to worry about Mickey Moniak then playing left field. You don't have to give a long-term contract because I'm sure he will get some sort of pillow deal. I think it'll be similar to the kind of deal that Noah Syndergaard got last year with the Angels, which was a 1 year, but just greater than what the qualifying offer was going to end up giving him. I think that Bellinger probably gets 1 year, maybe $20 million or something like that, which is higher than the projected $18 million arbitration that he was probably going to get. So, I think his price is going to fall based on this, right? He's currently going around pick 200. He's, likely not going to be with the Dodgers next year. People will won't be willing to draft him quite as highly because of that fact. The runs and RBIs around him not going to be as good on pretty much any other team in baseball. So if he drops to 250-ish, which I think is within the realm of possibility. Other outfielders going at 250 are Andrew Benintendi, who doesn't have a team, Michael Conforto, who doesn't have a team, Gavin Lux, who is still on the Dodgers and probably has a little bit more playing time now that Bellinger isn't going to be there. Lourdes Gurriel Jr., Trey Mancini, who doesn't have a team yet, Randall Grichuk. None of these guys are huge necessarily difference makers in the way that Bellinger could be if Bellinger gets right.
Right.
So I guess around 250, I would be interested. But, man, I still think it's a huge gamble. And I think it really depends on the construct of your team at pick 250, if you've already taken some huge gambles or if you haven't. And if you haven't, then I think maybe Bellinger is a gamble worth taking. But if you have, I think you probably need to just ignore him and move on to a guy who's a little bit safer. So moving right along to the next guy, we've got Brian Anderson, who is non-tendered by the Marlins. Jason, any interest in Brian Anderson if he finds a new spot? Or if you were drafting today, would you even consider him?
I would. I like Brian Anderson as a player overall. I really like the dual eligibility, the fact that he can play third base and right field, and he retains that this year for fantasy drafting purposes. One of the better throwing arms in baseball, but the range is an issue. That said, it's like I'm intrigued with him because 2019 is the outlier, the power. It just that the 20 home runs he hit that year, just add that to the baseball. But everything else he does is repeatable. I mean, the Marlins, one of the things they talked about this winter was wanting to find players that could make more consistent contact. They struck out a bunch as a team last year. Anderson, his strikeout rate is slightly below league average, but one of the things that pulled him down last year was a year that he really struggled to hit right-handed pitching. He hit 215 against them last year. And previously hit 278. So we see these year-to-year things, but this was by far his worst year against righties, and that pulled down his overall batting average. But that said, he's normally been a guy that is very accepting of his walks, gets on base a lot, and has hit for a league average, if not slightly better than league average. So when you look at a guy that has that type of versatility on the left side, on third base and the outfield, and has that kind of offensive profile, I mean, this would be the only time I'm going to mention this really on this podcast. This feels like a future Ray because it has all of the makings of the players they have been targeting lately, like Harold Ramirez, Isaac Paredes. This feels like a future Ray. That said, with all those righty bats around, I don't know if they can afford another one, but that really feels like what this could be. But I do like Brian Anderson as a player. I always have. It'd be cool to have Brian Anderson calling Brian Anderson's game. And then maybe they can play Milwaukee so we can have Brian Anderson calling Milwaukee's game. Brian Anderson doing these color broadcasts with Brian Anderson at the plate. That would be fun.
I'm gonna see your he's a future Ray and raise you, which that he's a future giant. Another
glorious place.
Yeah, like he could be kind of a guy. Well, he's a guy who could play multiple positions, right? He could play all over the diamond. He's probably best suited to be a platoon guy. At this point, I have huge concerns about the contact profile and what we saw this year. We saw his worst zone contact rate in his career, but his highest zone swing percentage in his career. Like those two things combining, not a good thing. I don't want Brian Anderson on any of my fantasy teams. I just don't think he matters and has any sort of upside really, and much less we have no idea what the playing time is. I think he'll be a utility kind of infield, outfield kind of guy for whatever team he lands on. I mean, unless he lands on a team like the Pirates or something like that. Like,
I don't want him. I don't want him with the playing time volume that he had in 18 and 19. Because I would never project somebody like him to have the 670. If you could find a way, and that's one of the things the Giants have done well, just like Tampa Bay and a couple of other teams, is set people up for success. I mean, Darren Ruff was a non-draftable player a couple of years ago. The Giants were like, let's take him, let's use him in these situations, and it worked out really well for him. And so Wilmer Flores, I mean, there's a few examples there, but if you could find somebody and find their strengths and accentuate that, we were talking DC earlier with Newman. It's like end game third base. I need a fifth outfielder type of situation in a 15-team league. There are more starts to throw than this profile, depending on where he lands. If you're looking at him to bring home 500 plus plate appearances, I think you'll be left wanting by the end of the season. But if you get into a situation that accentuates his positives, there's still some good in him here.
Kevin, what are your thoughts on Brian Anderson?
I like Brian Anderson. I am really intrigued to see where he lands. And I agree with most everything both of you guys have said. The one thing I would add to Jason's point is in the shortened 2020, he backed up the power that he had in 2019 with 11 home runs and playing 59 of the 60 games. Unfortunately, that's the last season we've seen him healthy. So that is the issue. But at his draft cost, his ADP in the 560s in DCs, but such a wide range. There's over a 300 pick range for where he's been taken as minimum 396 and maximum 702. If he's hanging out there,
his father plays NFBC and then everybody else. So
yeah. So yeah, at his average cost, they're in the 560s or even later, where he's going in some drafts. I absolutely will take a gamble in draft and holds, and he will not be drafted in most fab leagues where we're only drafting 30 or so players, even in a 15-team league. Probably still going to be available at that first waiver wire period. So he's a guy I want to keep a really close eye on in spring training. I think these last 2 seasons, I'm chalking it all up to health. If he's healthy, I think he lands somewhere, because he's such not just the versatility, he's a good defender with that versatility. That will keep him in some lineups if he's healthy.
I mean, he was not a good defender this year. Like, if you look at the numbers, the numbers say he was not a very good defender. That could be injuries, though. Like you mentioned, he's been dealing with a plethora of injuries over the last 2 years. I don't know that he's special enough, like, to warrant, like, especially without any sort of role right now. I think you definitely have to wait until you see where he signs, because if he's projected to be a bench bat for any team, like, who cares? He is going to have a better park, right? He's going to get out of Miami. More than likely, he's going to have a better park. But he's also a guy that hits the ball on the ground like 50% of the time. So you kind of add that with a guy who probably doesn't have a crap ton of power to begin with. I don't know. Just seems boring to me, even if he does have a bigger role. Let's talk about a guy who may be a KBO superstar at some point, but has not yet been able to do it at the major league level. I'm talking about Dominic Smith, the aforementioned Dominic Smith, who is non-tendered by the Mets. Kevin, do you think that him landing on another team is going to give him an opportunity to actually have the breakout that some people thought he was going to have a few years ago?
Probably not. I think he's a platoon guy. I think I really don't know when it comes to Dom Smith. He's so perplexing. We were really excited after the 2019, of course, and then 2020. 2020 he actually played in 50 of the 60 games and hit another 10 home runs in about the same number of plate appearances that he had the 11 home runs in 2019. That's why we were all excited. That's why we were hoping to see him get everyday at bats. He got 493 plate appearances then in 2021 and stayed at that 11 home runs in 2.5 times the number of plate appearances. I just don't think he's going to be an everyday player wherever he ends up. And so I'm not really interested.
Jason, are you interested in Dom Smith?
Like I said earlier with Bellinger, this is a guy that the expectations since his prospect pedigree and him coming up to the major league level and having that early success in the 2020 season, has been, the spotlight has been on him. And then him trying to play through the shoulder issue in 2021 that eventually needed him to have surgery, disrupted his recovery in the offseason, and then bounce back and forth. I saw him play here in Charlotte a few times when Syracuse came through to play the Knights. Looked good to me. AAA numbers look good. I mean, really want to see him in a different situation where the expectations aren't going to be there like he is the next greatest thing. It kind of reminds me, profile everything, about how James Loney was when he left the Dodgers and was ended up to find another place. So if he could find, Pittsburgh would have been a great place, but they traded for Ji-Man Choi, and apparently that's where they want to go. And, maybe they do something with the Nationals and say, hey, go there. But he needs a place where he can go, find himself healthy, because last year he was, playing from the recovering shoulder surgery and dealing with an ankle issue that disrupted his summer as well. So he hasn't been healthy in 2 years. And 2 years prior to that, everybody was like, oh my God, look at this. This is what's happening. He's still young enough to rediscover some of that. And so I want to see where he lands. And he is like free. I mean, he is, you can wait. You don't need to draft him in a free agent league. His ADP is kind of in the bottom of the 600s right now. So in a draft and hold, where you're taking 50 rounds, easily taking him round 40 later why he's still out there, because again, I've said this a few times now, there's still some good in him somewhere. We need to see, now that he's healthy and away from the expectations of the New York media market, what's possible.
His ADP currently is 711. And that probably drops. He's only been drafted in 12 of the 26 leagues that have gone on. So, I mean, in the vast majority of leagues so far, he's not even been drafted in a 50-round draft and hold. And those, almost all of those drafts have been 50 rounds and 15 teams. So that's a lot of picks that went before him in a lot of drafts. So he's free. I mean, he's legit free. I know people don't like when you hear analysts on podcasts go, "This guy is free," but Dom Smith is legitimately free. It seems like he got picked 421 in one draft, and that's about it. So the rest of them have been going in the 700s. So I still have some belief he can figure it out, at least as a platoon bat. The problem is, last year he only played first base, so he doesn't have the outfield eligibility. So it doesn't even give you kind of the multi-positional eligibility or the eligibility in the position that is weaker, like the outfield. And I just don't know if he's going to continue to be a first base only guy. Like, what team needs him as a bench bat, or, potentially, giving an opportunity to play, part-time as a role. And I think that's going to be the hardest thing. And one of the reasons I made the joke that he could be just a KBO superstar is he may not find a job in the majors. So, and maybe a place like Korea or Japan ends up being where he can go and revitalize his career. So I have no problem taking a dart throw on him super, super late, last couple rounds of a 50-round draft and hold. But until we know that he has a job somewhere, at least a minor league contract with an invitation to spring training, I'm going to be very, very wary not to load up on a bunch of shares of him, because I think you could legitimately get a zero from him this year. Moving on to the last guy, Luke Voit, speaking of first baseman, was non-tendered by the Washington Nationals. Jason, what are your thoughts on Luke Voit, and does this just solidify Joey Meneses as their opening day first baseman?
Yeah, working backwards first, yes, believe it does. But that said, I'm still very interested in Luke Voit, because he's one of these players, when you watch him, the at-bats, it's weird when you watch him, because the at-bats aren't giveaways. I mean, he works a very tough plate appearance. He will spoil sliders away. You try to get him up. You try to get him up with velocity, but he'll spoil that too. So he's a tough out. And we saw in 2020, when he led the league in home runs over that 60-game season, when he's right, he's still very good. I mean, he's an elite ball barreler, if that's a phrase. You still look at his metrics. He can really hit the snot out of a baseball. But he struggled with health. He's had oblique injuries. He's had hand injuries. He's had issues the past few seasons. And what do I have a note? 2 of the past 3 qualified seasons, his swing and miss rate has been a single digit. His percentile has been a single digit number. So even though he has very disciplined plate appearances, he doesn't really chase a lot. He will swing and miss a lot, but he also makes some really hard contact around that swing and miss. He's also one of these guys I'm intrigued in, because in a reduced shifting world, he should benefit. I mean, he is one of the guys the league absolutely puts 3 guys on the left side of the infield against him. And so he has absolutely no foot speed, so he can't run anything out. But that's where it'll get in a reduced shifting world. He becomes a little more intriguing on that, because that hard contact, whether it's on the ground, whether it's on the air, can help get through that infield a little bit. So I'm in the right ballpark and situation. I'm intrigued by Voit, but I also would be remiss if I didn't mention he looked at times extremely disinterested in playing for the Nationals. Having gone from playing on a perennial contender like the Yankees, then going to the Padres, and then getting dumped to the Nationals. I remember a couple of times there was a play where it's like, wow, you really made a good effort on that one there, kid. So if he were to go to Cincinnati, that would be a lot of fun. But is he going to be willing to play for a team that is going to be out of it first week of the season? Obviously, if he were to go to Colorado and somehow they're like, here, go hit and play DH. Yay, that's fun. So again, right ballpark situation, because there's a lot of power there. But again, there's also the risk of the injuries, which have piled up the last couple of years. But if they can just say, go be a DH somewhere in the right lineup, in the right ballpark, there's a potential for like a CJ Cron type rebound. Because this is the same kind of conversation we were having with Cron when he was a free agent. You know, a lot of power, not a good fielder, a lot of swing and miss, has had some problems with injuries. In the right situation, he could be well, but he ends up in Colorado. And all of a sudden, you know, he's been better than anybody expected in Colorado. So it made, you know, Voit's unlikely to get that kind of home, but there's other ballparks that could be a nice fit for him as well.
Kevin,
what are your thoughts on Luke Voit? Worth drafting right now?
It really depends. He's got a wide range, and I agree with most everything Jason just said, and that makes him very intriguing. I don't like him, I don't think, at 231, which is his minimum, but when you start approaching 389, anywhere in the 300s, I think, very intriguing where he might end up. Because when you're looking at it, these drafts, there's so many things we're trying to concentrate on early in drafts, right? Now we want a catcher or two. We want a couple relievers. And so we start missing out on things. And if you still need a corner, as you get to that point, some of the guys going after him, Eduardo Escobar, Patrick Wisdom, Wilmer Flores, Isaac Paredes, I'd much rather snag Luke Voit and take a chance there and see where he ends up. If and I get him in that 300 or later range, which it appears is happening in a lot of drafts.
Yeah, I think for me, it all depends on if he's going to get a full-time role somewhere, or just like somewhat close to, you know, a halftime role. And the hard part is finding him a spot which he can just be a DH only guy on a team like that actually will employ like a full-time DH. Because defensively, I don't think he's worth teams putting out there at first base unless they really need a power infusion. There's one spot that I can think of that makes a lot of sense for Luke Voit. It's on a team that is competing. They just won their division. It's on a team that doesn't want to spend a ton of money. So Luke Voit is a cheap way to fill that DH spot, and they don't currently have a DH. That's the Cleveland Guardians. I wouldn't mind that. I think that would be a great spot for him to potentially get 450, 500 plate appearances on a team that, you know, is still good and in a park that I think would play well for him. So maybe if he ends up on a team like Cleveland, I'll be interested. But currently where he is going, I don't know that I want to take the risk that he is one of those guys that doesn't sign or ends up having to sign on like a kind of a really reduced role. So I think I'm going to wait until he signs before I draft him. But Cleveland, go ahead, pick up the phone. You don't want to spend a lot of money. Luke Voigt's not going to cost very much. All right, let's move on and talk about our main topic of the day, and that is players with big differences in their min and their max. And there's no one that has got a weirder min max, and for good reason, than Bryce Harper. His minimum pick, 6. He's gone 6th overall in a draft. His max pick so far, 98. That will likely drop. Kevin, is there any chance you will draft Bryce Harper?
I don't think so. He'd have to drop much further, I think, until we may get more information this coming week. Right now, is he going to be out a few weeks or a few months? We still don't know. I don't believe. I haven't seen anything other than they don't even know if the UCL surgery is going to be Tommy John or not. Last I read. So this is going to be a big week. If you're starting to draft this week, keep an eye on it. And if later, then we'll have a little more information. I go back to, Shohei Ohtani was a pretty good hitter recovering from Tommy John and not pitching. I don't know if that would be the case with Bryce Harper. We just don't know how long he's going to be out. One thing I would point out is we don't really know where he's going in DCs yet. After this news, because there hasn't been one that started after we heard about the surgery and been completed to be added into the ADP. That 98 max ADP is probably either one of the new Gladiator leagues or cut line, because his max on DCs is still 23, still a second round pick there, which I don't see happening in any draft since this news until we know more.
Jason, what are your thoughts on Bryce Harper? You taking him this year?
Not in the first round. With the surgery, he's having the surgery Wednesday. So happy Thanksgiving to him. Kind of weird to have it the day before Thanksgiving. So he's having that surgery. It is UCL surgery. We don't know if it'll be the full-blown Tommy John or if they'll do the brace type of thing. Situation. The one that keeps coming back to me, I mean, Kevin, you mentioned Ohtani. I don't remember the date for that, but like the one that keeps coming back to me is Carlos Quentin. Quentin to me is like the highest profile position player that we saw playing the outfield the very next season. Now, Quentin got his Tommy John surgery right as he was drafted, or right after he was drafted in June of 2003. And then he played 114 games in the outfield in the minors for the Diamondbacks in 2004. So he was able to play in the outfield because he had to. But again, that surgery was June. Now add 5 more months onto it, and if Harper has, let's say he has full blown Tommy John surgery like Quentin had, right? And so 6-month recovery time. As I'm sitting down to plan what I want to do with Bryce Harper, I am fully expecting him to miss the first 2 months of the season. If that doesn't happen, then I'm pleasantly surprised. But as I look at him, I'm knocking a third off his value because I'm expecting him to miss a third of the season. And when he comes back, maybe he has to DH. We've already stories about him saying he's going to cut back a little bit on how he swings. Who knows how that's going to play? But I'm expecting him to miss at least a third of the season. Therefore, I'm letting other people take the risk, and somebody else will. If they get the reward, more power to them. But I'm not. I just don't see a path forward for him to play in the major leagues before Memorial Day.
And I couldn't agree more. And I think I talked about this with Paul in a recent episode, so I won't rehash everything. But at the end of the day, like, when are we expecting to get outfield eligibility? Are they going to let him just play the outfield as soon as he's ready to come back, or is he going to DH? And he's UT only in leagues that require 20-game minimums. I don't know. I just don't want that risk. I'm not, the one thing I've learned about these draft and hold leagues is that injuries pile up pretty quickly, and they don't have any sort of like regular time of year for it. And so like I've had draft and hold leagues where all of a sudden I'm starting Eric Sogard, who is like the last guy off the bench for the Brewers, at shortstop because I've lost Tatis and Mondesi, and you just got to be really careful not inviting injuries onto your team in any format, but especially these formats where you can't pick up guys off the waiver wire. So the new Gladiator League, the new someone took him. Kevin is right that 98 was in one of the Gladiator Leagues. For those who don't know what that format is you draft 23 guys, 9 pitchers and 14 hitters, but no bench spot. There's also no position, so you can draft a UT only guy, but that person is rostering Bryce Harper on their active lineup all year. It does not matter like that he's not potentially going to play the first 2 months. That just killed that guy. Like whoever took him, even at 98, like that's an awful pick right now. So
he's probably listening, going, Justin, whatever.
I'm sorry. Like I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Like you're taking a 0 in one of your 14 hitter spots for some period of time, and you just don't want to invite that onto your team. So
it's a good point about the health too, because even in the draft and hold that I won this year, the last few weeks of the season, I was out of healthy. I had one pitcher at the end of September that I could swap in, and then that guy got hurt, so I was down to the 9 pitchers that I was using, and I had 2 guys on my bench as hitters that I could roll into my lineup that were not out for the year in the minors or never made the majors type of thing. That because I think we started that draft in November, so I was down to 2 bats and no arms the final 2 weeks of the season. And I didn't jump into first place until the final 3 weeks of the season. So I believe the guy that was leading the league had an attrition problem. And I just eventually caught up in a number of areas. But heading into the final weekend of the season, there were 3 of us that could have won the league. And I ended up holding on because I had enough guys to, hold the water off from flooding the boat. But if I had one more injury, I would have been done.
Yeah, and I mean, I maintain that if you're going to play in a 50-round draft and hold, you can play that on FBC or on Fantrax. I think are the 2 spots that have them right now. So those you can't play on FBC because you're in a state that doesn't have it, you can go play the format over on Fantrax. Take 5 stashes, max 5 stashes out of the 50. And I think one of the mistakes people make is try to take too many. And if you're only going to take 5 out of the 50 as a stash, it shouldn't be one of your first top 100 picks, right? It shouldn't be it should not be like a guy that you're taking, with one of those, first 10 rounds. And you've got to take that with Bryce Harper. And you shouldn't be doing it.
I maintain I won that league when I took Stephen Kwan in the 38th round and Cal Raleigh in the 39th. That's what ended up winning me. Those were late stashes for me.
Great picks.
My Cal Raleigh love was well known, and I had him as I think I took him in that case. He was my 3rd catcher, but it was just like, oh my God, I love this guy. He's still sitting there. I was considering taking him at C2. I'm taking him now. But those were what won me the league ultimately, because I had some bad picks early on, but getting those 2 guys that late was huge.
The next guy we're going to talk about is Kenley Jansen. Now, his min-max is pretty large, which his min is 47 and his max is 143, so almost 100 pick difference. And that's in large part because he has not signed with a team. We expect him to sign with a team, and there have been reports recently that the Giants are interested in bringing him in, which will have an effect on a different guy we're going to talk about here in a little bit. But Jason, what are your thoughts on Kenley Jansen? Is he a guy you're taking a dart throw on right now?
All right, so I pulled the ADP growth from month over month today and looked at it. Jansen's already jumped up 14 picks. He was 90th in October, 90 ADP, and he's 76 currently in the November drafts. I just said, whatever drafts, I didn't bust into it, but that's why I just pulled that. And that puts them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11th on the closer behind Diaz, Clase, Hader, Hendricks, Romano, Presley, Williams, Bautista, Doval, and Hensley. That's where he's currently going. What I laughed, if those of you guys watching the video stream live or later, when you brought up Jansen's, like every Atlanta fan that I know, hated watching this guy. It's like, oh no, smoke him if you got him. Here comes Kenley Jansen. But then you go look at all the other numbers, and they still look fantastic. And that's kind of the crazy thing is, it's always seemed like there was somebody on base, and he was, there was always something, but he got the job done. And then you look at the overall numbers. If you were to hide the name and be like, hey, look at these numbers. Oh, this guy's great. I'm taking him as a top 5 closer. The concern I have with Jansen is the new pitch clock rules, because he is slower than Christmas. When he pitches, he takes a long time between his pitches, and his way of controlling the running game has been to vary between being slow as Christmas and being slower than Christmas, and then taking a week to deliver a pitch. Like there hasn't been much of that, or throwing over a bunch. Well, he can only do that twice now. If he does it a third time, you better get him. Otherwise, that's a balk, and the guy goes to second base. So honestly, that's my only concern with Jansen this year is how quickly he can adjust to the new pitch clock rules. Because he is, to me, exhibit 1A of the guy that I'm worried about this year. I'm not worried about starting pitching as much because we know guys that are terrible at controlling the running game are bad at doing that. But with Jansen, can he, as a big dude who likes to build up his rest in between pitches, can he pitch as effectively with a pitch clock on him? So that's honestly my only reservation. That's it. I really hate the fact that the NFBC format, it requires you to take these closers like this, and the market keeps pushing these values up. In November, we already have 4 closers going in the first 3 rounds, and I want to throw up when I see that. It's like, nah. But it's like you have to do it, and you kind of do. But I'm hoping none of these guys get into the first round like we saw last year. But, it happened, and it probably will happen again. But I can see, with the risk, because after, we got one more guy to talk about, but then it gets really soft in a hurry. Then it's all about upside. and we'll take the guy that we think is going to get the job, and then somebody else, like nobody was drafting Daniel Bard this time last year. He was a afterthought, barely making it in some leagues, and look what he did with that. Mm-hmm. So I really try to avoid getting into the guy that should get the job and the guy who ends up getting the job type of thing. It's tough to read the minds of managers. But Jansen is, by the numbers, excellent. It's how is he going to adjust to the pitch clock is my only reservation. And that said, when I look at his ADP in November, which is 76, which would put him, right in the 5th round. That's where he's going, 5th or 6th round. Heck, I'd be okay taking him as closer 1 if I can get him there.
Kevin, where are you at on Kenley Jansen?
Yeah, I agree because I don't think landing spot matters. He will be a closer wherever he ends up, or he won't sign with the team. I'm going to bring up the Gladiator Leagues one more time because I am currently in one of these drafts, and this has really pushed up his minimum pick. 2 of the first 3 pitchers were relievers, 5 of the first 9, and 11 of the top 20. And that includes Kenley Jansen as that 11th reliever, as Jason mentioned. The next reliever taken was over 2 rounds later, and that was Scott Barlow. So there's our drop-off. But his min in DCs is in the 5th round there, which is more than his average overall. His min is 69 in draft champions leagues. So I agree with Jason. You're getting to that 5th or 6th round. He's probably the last guy that we really trust is going to be a reliever. And when he was talking about Braves fans watching Kenley Jansen, 20 years ago, I was living up near Seattle, and so watching a lot of local Seattle Mariners games. And I'll never forget, I always called it the heart attack saves. Jose Mesa, right? And he was interviewed after blowing a save one time, and all he said is, I go out there and throw it as hard as I can. They hit it. Nothing I can do. That kind of reminds me of Kenley Jansen, the way it is watching him now. He is definitely the poster player for not watching your closers live that are on your fantasy teams.
Oh, I like that quote. That's a really, really good quote. Yeah, I mean, I think right now, if you're taking a guy like Kenley Jansen who doesn't have a team, you can't really pick a safer guy than Kenley Jansen because he's going to be the closer wherever he's at, right? Like one of you guys mentioned, like he's not going to sign with a team to be a setup guy. I think he's going to sign to be a closer, and he probably is going to get on a pretty decent team because I don't think a bad team is necessarily going to pay the kind of contract he needs to sign in order for him to close for them. So like it's not going to be like a Mark Melancon situation where he ends up on a bad Arizona team, right? He's potentially going to end up in Boston or in maybe the Yankees or something like that. He's a better chance of doing what he did last year in draft season, which is ruin somebody else's value than he has ending up in a bad situation for him. So I got no problem taking Kenley Jansen, but to kind of talk about a little bit about what Kevin just mentioned in terms of the making sure your ADP is correctly set, which I clearly did not do for this episode when I put these show notes together. Make sure that when you're using NFBC ADP, you sort by the league type that you want, right? And for most of people, that's going to be draft champions, right? Draft champions, I think, has the best ADP. It's going to have the most leagues, and it's not going to have weird rules like this new Gladiator format or the cut line format. So if you're looking for regular ADP for your regular league to kind of look at that kind of stuff, use draft champions, especially because I think, and I'm going to double check as I'm talking right now, I don't think the NFBC 50s, which are 12-team leagues, it only has 2 drafts so far, so you don't necessarily want to use that. So use the draft champions ADP, which has a total of 22 completed drafts so far. And then if you're in a more shallow format league and you want to use the NFBC 50s after the draft season has gone on, use that. But just make sure you set those settings right. And as draft season goes on, start using the dates correctly too, right? You don't want to necessarily just use all the way back from October because that information is not going to be as relevant once we get to February and March. All right. The next guy we're talking about is Byron Buxton. Not a shocker that he's going to have a big gap between his min and his max. Min so far 48, max so far 130. Kevin, what are your thoughts on Byron Buxton?
For me, this depends on how many leagues you play in. I think if you're someone that's in one or two leagues, I probably don't take this risk. I know with injuries, guys are injury prone until they're not. Most recently, Aaron Judge. Guy in the past that comes to mind, Nelson Cruz. I think that had a lot to do with moving to full-time designated hitter. But still, they're absolutely he is worth this min pick if he stays healthy, and even earlier. He's probably not worth the max pick for what we've seen over the past 2 or 3 years. In me, as someone that plays in several leagues, I'm going to have a couple of teams with Byron Buxton. But again, if you're only in one or two, I don't think I take this risk.
Jason, where are you at on Byron Buxton?
Still hurting, from what he did to me in Tout. It's just like we're talking about 4 consecutive full seasons without him even having 390 plate appearances. That's the tough part. And then the batting average variance. I've said it a few times with some other guys. He's had an 82 point batting average variance over the past few years. He still has all the speed to run out infield hits. And that should help him hit average as long as he's healthy. But if he doesn't have the speed to run that out, then he loses that part of his game. He demolished baseballs last year, hitting 22 home runs in the part-time thing. But then you look at things like his in-zone contact was as bad as it's ever been in his career. I believe it was his career worst. And so it wasn't like he was getting himself into trouble chasing stuff out of the zone. There was swing and miss inside the zone. And so perhaps some of that came from him just saying, okay, I can't really run, so I'm just going to try to hit the ball harder, as hard as I can. And that could have led to that, but maybe that's his new path forward. Kind of to that point where Mike Trout has gotten his career, where he's like, I have all this speed, but I'm not going to go out there and hurt myself stealing bases. Remember, I believe it was Buxton got hurt on his first stolen base attempt of the season last year, and he ended up stealing 5 more kind of late in the season, but that's not what you drafted him for. So perhaps he's going to shift into this phase of his career where I am going to just try to hit the snot out of the baseball. I'm not going to try to do these things that have led to injury after injury after injury for me. But again, 4 consecutive plate appearances with fewer than 390 plate appearances. It's tough to get over that. I don't care if I'm playing 12 leagues this year. I don't want him on any one of my teams, just because every year you think it's going to be the year that you get on the discount. And honestly, I have avoided him everywhere. And then last year I was like, okay, this is finally a price that I can get in on. And he just did what he always does. So that's where it's like, man, I can't. I honestly can't. More power to you if you can, though.
I'm absolutely shocked that his price is this low, considering the amount of Byron Buxton apologists there are in the industry and just in general. Because this is a guy that continuously does what he does, which is play really well when he's on the field and then just get hurt and miss the majority of the season over and over again. But there's always that one person that goes, 1 year he's going to stay healthy. 1 year he's going to stay healthy. And I have to see it. I just can't. I just can't continue to just believe. We've seen him get above 300 and
82. I think it's the high water mark.
Well, he had 511 in 2017.
Well, that's what I mean. But after that, since then, 382 is the high water mark,
which was last year, 92 games. And we've also seen that even when he is healthy, the Twins are going to manage him a little bit to try to keep him healthier. Here's the thing. Byron Buxton is really format contingent, right? In best ball leagues, he's a great guy because when he's on the field and playing well, you're going to get all that goodness and none of the badness because it's going to automatically switch out for the player who played, the best that week. So when he's not playing, you're obviously going to get someone to replace him. In really shallow formats, he makes a lot of sense, especially daily moves formats, right? You can move him in and out when he's not playing, put him on the IL when he's injured, and there's replacement value on the waiver wire. But if you're playing in a 15-team league, if you're playing in a drafted hold league, if you're playing even in a 12-team league that doesn't have a lot of IL spots, outfield is so bad this year that there's not going to be much on the waiver wire when Byron Buxton does go down. You're going to have to play a player that you are not going to be happy to play. And so if you are going to draft Byron Buxton, you need to make sure that your first outfield reserve player is actually someone you want to play during the season, because you don't want to have to go to the waiver wire and get a guy who is a part-time player for Pittsburgh, like a Greg Allen type, to fill in, because that's what's going to be available on a lot of waiver wires when he goes down. So
yeah,
just be very, very careful about where you draft him. And I tend to agree with Kevin. Like, if you're one of those people that only plays in 1 or 2 leagues, you may just want to avoid it, because he's one of those guys that could just ruin your season. Moving right along to the next guy, we have George Kirby, min 67, max 148. I'm a big fan of George Kirby. I've already drafted him twice out of my 3 drafts so far this year. So we'll know what I'm going to say when it gets back around to you. Jason, what are your thoughts on George Kirby?
All right, if I could read, because I actually wrote his player cap for RotoWire.
Oh, nice.
So I'm just going to read exactly what I've put for that. Kirby is an extremely fascinating pitching profile for a few reasons. His primary calling card is his fastball command. He's been incredibly stingy with walks as a pitcher since college. He's had 43 walks in 247 professional innings and 50 in 240 innings when pitching at Elon. He uses a fastball command to fill the strike zone with his fastball as he throws his four-seamer 45% of the time. In the league, hit 221 against that pitch. That fastball by velo and movement aligns him with the likes of Brandon Woodruff, Frankie Montas, Zach Wheeler, and Jamison Taillon, according to StatCast. The other part of his profile is the rest of his repertoire is very hittable, as every other pitch he threw had an opponent's batting average of 266 or higher. Despite that challenge, he won 8 of his 25 starts upon his promotion and still had good ratios with a stellar 21% strikeout minus walk percentage. If any of his secondary offerings can take a step forward, things could get very interesting for him in a hurry, as there were significant gaps in his actual versus expected batting averages on his cutter, sinker, and slider. Wide awake sleeper. Those are my thoughts on George Kirby. The fastball command is just terrific for his ability to have the success he had, despite all of his other offerings not really doing much for him in the actual outcomes. But the expected one said things should have been better. If any one of those pitches does their expected rather than their actual, it could get really. I mean, the fastball command is very unique, and he's pitched like this ever since he's taken the mound graduating high school. So I'm intrigued, but like I said, wide awake sleeper. Everybody loves George Kirby. And it's, if you love him, you better be willing to take him early, because he's going early.
Kevin, what are your thoughts on George Kirby?
I like George Kirby, but I'm concerned about the innings. Prior to 2022, he'd never reached 70 innings in a season, and he jumped all the way to 130, and he got blown up by Oakland and Detroit in 2 of his last 3 starts. So I don't know that we'll see the big jump in innings we're hoping to see. We'd like to see him jump from 130 to 150, 160. I don't know if we'll see that because of the way it appears to me. He might have wore down a little bit at the end of the season. And if you're looking at ADP, some of the guys going right after him, Kyle Wright, 185 innings, Logan Webb, 190 innings, teammate Logan Gilbert, 185 innings. I think I'm still at this point in a draft really looking for volume, and I don't know that I'm going to get it from George Kirby, so he's a little overpriced for me.
Does it make you feel any better that he went out in the playoffs and threw 6 scoreless innings? Like, I mean,
absolutely, he's a great pitcher. I just don't know that we'll see the big increase that we would like to see. I think Steamer has him projected for 143 innings. We'd really like to see him go to 150 or 160 after 130, and I don't know that we're going to see that jump.
I mean, I think when you get, or sorry, he threw 8 scoreless innings, not Or no. So you threw 6 and then threw 2 innings somewhere else. So that's 138 innings. You include playoffs. I think he can get to 150 pretty easily. I mean, I think 150 from 138 is a pretty easy. And honestly, I wouldn't be surprised to see him get to 160. And that being said, I still think Seattle's probably going to run that 6-man rotation at times, which is going to limit the amount of times he gets 2 starts. I like George Kirby. I like him where he's going. I completely agree with everything Jason said in that write-up for RotoWire. I think it's fantastically done. I think all he needs is to take a step forward on one of those secondaries, and he's got a lot of those secondaries that he could potentially move forward. I like a guy with a complete arsenal and a guy who's young like him, who already has shown the really, really good command and control. I'm a big fan of Kirby. He's going to be one of them. Yeah,
I would say the funny thing is, like we talked about, market movement. He's been the same. It's October, his ADP was 102. November, it's 101. So there has been no adjustment yet. So if you're looking, I don't know where you took him, Justin, but that would put him in the 8th round. Is where he's, that's where he's gone. He's gone early 8 by ADP, a mid 95 and a max 113. So the market so far on him has been very, very stable. That would most likely be an SP3 by most folks. Folks usually, if you're going by the 4x4 plan, 4 hitters, a closer, 3 starting pitchers. So he's going SP3, and the market's been very stable. Be curious to watch that market to see how he grows, because I agree with Kevin about there are some bigger volume guys behind him that have already done it and have been there that don't have the 6-man rotation restriction put on them. And like if you are looking at George Kirby, but then you can say, hey, wait, if I wait like 2 to 3 rounds, I can go get Joe Ryan as well. So you have that type of similar profile type of situation, but it's curious that things are rather stable for a young guy like this, because typically I would expect to see a jump but right now it's been mostly relievers jumping. I'm looking at the starting pitcher market. And those guys really haven't had much of a bump, but some of these relievers have had almost a full round bump as some people start rolling out some of their strategies.
And I have to correct myself. I've only taken Logan Gilbert once. George Kirby once. I took Logan Gilbert in the other draft. So,
okay.
But I believe I got him in the 8th round. Is where
like a guy like Nick Lodolo, who we're not talking about, but an example, Nick Lodolo was moved up a full round. He's gone 15. His ADP has improved by 15 points 1 month over. Like what's been written or what's been spoken about Nick Lodolo to move that needle, whereas Kirby hasn't moved at all.
Yeah,
here he is.
Lodolo is going to be one of those guys that there are going to be certain people in the industry that are really championing kind of his skill set for good reason. I still have some.
I'm just looking at starting pitchers with a double-digit market movement. Lance Lynn, Dustin May are 2 of the other names that I'm seeing that have the positive. Meanwhile, Lucas Giolito's dropped around. He's gone down 15 points. So that's just one of the early movers that I've seen.
Yeah. The next guy on the list is Camilo Doval. I kind of mentioned he was the guy I was referencing when talking about Kenley Jansen and the rumors that he could end up in San Francisco. Kevin, where are you at on Camilo Doval? Does this Kenley Jansen rumor news scare you at all?
I think it scares whoever took him at 29 more than it scares anybody, right? That's the thing. We I don't think we were 100% confident he was safe, but we were fairly confident at this point in time he was going to be the closer. I got burned on Will Smith last year. I had Will Smith in almost every early draft I did. And so for that reason, I am scared to death of Doval at this point, and specifically because of the Kenley Jansen rumors. Because even if it's not Kenley Jansen, maybe it's somebody else. Maybe they take a chance on Aroldis Chapman, for example. The Will Smith burning I took last year is going to keep me away from Doval for right now.
5th round on a Will Smith.
Yeah, and I did too in a bunch of places on Will Smith. Yeah. And I tend to agree with you, Kevin, especially as a Giants fan, because I watched the Giants all year long. And I saw them try to go to a bunch of different guys because they weren't completely sold on Camilo Doval. Now, none of the other guys could work out, right? Like, Tyler Rogers couldn't figure it out. They went to, why am I blanking on dude's name that they went to that I think they just DFA'd? Dominic Leone, he couldn't get it together. Like, they had a bunch of guys they tried to go to, and they end up having to keep going back to Doval because they didn't have any other options, which makes me wonder, are they going to address it with an established guy like Kenley Jansen, like Aroldis Chapman? I would not be surprised. I mean, I hope they don't. I don't think you should be spending assets like that, when you're still kind of rebuilding, but who knows what the Giants will do. Jason, you in on Doval at all?
Not at this price. I mean, he's 9th closer off the board. I was out on him last year, and I was wrong. I mean, he ended up getting the saves. I wrote him, like, bold prediction-wise, like he wasn't going to hold this job because, throughout his minor league career, walks were a big problem. And they were a big problem for him early in 21. Towards the end of the season, he found it. And then everybody was like, all right, let's draft him. And he never, his walk rate was almost 4 per 9 last year, but he strikes out enough to kind of offset it. Not great. But when I look at him 9th overall, it's like I can look down the board and look at other guys that I would rather have. It's like we talked earlier about what may happen, like Johan Duran. Love that. And if Rocco Baldelli doesn't, the Twins just did offer Pagan arbitration, so he's still in the fold. Like if he pulls a Daniel Bard, that would suck. Maybe he's this year's Will Smith. We're all looking at Duran saying, wow, it's like nobody can hit this guy. This guy's going to be the closer, and they give the job to Pagan. So, that could happen. But then you look at like Jose Leclerc before he got hurt with Tommy John. The Rangers loved him as a closer. Then he went down, and he made his way back late last year. And, then I'm looking at Pete Fairbanks way down there. And how he closed the season. I'm surprised to see Fairbanks is so low. I know Justin, the never trust cash theory. I get it. But how is Pete Fairbanks? He pitches high leverage. So it's like the reliever wins or saves with all the strikeouts and the improvements that he showed. I'm surprised he's this far down the list. Like even behind that bum Gregory Soto, Paul. He's way down there on that. That said, it's like there are other guys I'm willing to take the throw on rather than pay the current market price on Doval, who has seen that market price jump up a full round in a 12-team league. He went from 76 in October to 65 in November. So, people are starting that strategy. He's going out there. I'd rather take another hitter and push that closer acquisition down than take my chance on Doval. Even if Kenley Jansen were to go somewhere else, I still have my concerns about this one.
Yeah. Last guy we're going to talk about is Gunnar Henderson, who is guy who came up and made his debut last year, and people are really, really excited. Even some really, really smart people in the industry. He is only third base eligible right now. I know in some formats he might have shortstop eligibility still, probably like Yahoo. But for our purposes, he's third base only. His min is 59. His max is 138 with an ADP of 97. Kevin, what are your thoughts on Gunnar Henderson? Are you taking the upside play on him?
I think in some drafts, there comes a point where you almost have to. And now I'm excited about Gunnar Henderson. I think the Baltimore lineup offensively, and even without the nice winning streak they went on and contending into later in the year, I've been a fan of Baltimore hitters for 2 or 3 years longer than that. They pan out pretty well. But when you're looking at ADP, he's the last one before a big drop off. He's the 8th third baseman off the board, going shortly after Alex Bregman. And then there is over a 50 pick drop. So over 3 rounds in 15 teamers, over 4 rounds in 12 teamers before Brian Hayes going those 50 picks later. So third base has that steep drop off. And if you miss out on one of the top guys, he's the last one to snag unless you're willing to wait until guys go in the 150 range. And there's several there. So it is a viable strategy to go ahead and let him go and wait But I think the upside is probably worth a shot here, especially as I'll say with a lot of these players, if you can get him at least at the average or maybe a little later rather than that min of 59 for Gunnar Henderson. I don't know if I'm making that move in the end of the 4th round, but a little later, across the 3 levels, 23 home runs, 23 stolen bases. We all love that, right? So I think in some instances, depending on how your draft's going, and if you grab one of the earlier guys or not, you may be in a spot where you really want to snag him there in the late 90s if he's still there.
Jason, where are you at on Gunnar Henderson?
Is this the tax that we're having to pay because of what Julio Rodriguez and Bobby Witt Jr. did this last year? I mean,
absolutely.
This feels like we just had 2 amazing rookies come up and exceed expectations, and so the next one up is going to do it too. And it's no slight on Gunnar Henderson. I agree, Kevin. He is the drop off. It's like you're there, and then if you don't want to take him, then you're basically saying I'm good with third base for a while because you've got some things, and that's where I'm going to be. Like if it gets to me, but I like Alex Bregman quite a bit this year. I traded for him in a keeper league in anticipation of this year, and he's the guy going in front of him. But Bregman's ADP is 83, and if he's out there, then I'm going to say I'm going to look deeper because if I can wait 50 picks and look at Eugenio Suarez, that's still sitting there. Jose Miranda, who I like quite a bit, he's still sitting there. A healthier Max Muncy without all the overshifting is there. Brian Hayes and the volume is there. Matt Chapman's there. Josh Rojas, Alec Bohm took some nice steps forward. Brandon Drury. So there's still, I like the depth of third base this year. But there is definitely a stratification of really, really good guys, and then there's that gap. So it's how you want to plan things because everybody in that first level, not one of them is coming at any kind of discount at all. And so, this is about where Bregman, the funny thing is this is about where Bregman's price was sitting last year. I want to say he was in the 90s, so it's barely bumped up, but I'm not building my plans around Henderson. That said, if he somehow fell outside the top 100, I would be intrigued, but inside the top 100 just feels like the Rodriguez Witt Jr. tax, and it's unfair to him to compare him to those guys.
Yeah, I can't do it, man. Like, I just can't do it. Like, I understand why people are excited by him. I was talking to someone really, really smart in the industry. I'm not going to out him because I don't want to give away his I'm not going to give away his strategy.
Really so go ahead.
But we were talking about the third base pool and stuff, and when Gunnar Henderson came up, he was like, he's pretty much Bobby Witt Jr., right? Like, that to me, from a guy who's, like I said, really smart, very successful player, is pretty telling what he thinks of him. I don't think that's where Gunnar Henderson is going to end up being. I think
would they Rutschman him? Would they give him the Rutschman treatment and not call him up? Rutschman was great when he came up, but it took a long ass time for him to come up. Would they possibly Rutschman him?
I don't
know what the contract situation was.
Yeah, I don't think so because he's already had 132 plate appearances. They'd have to hold him down for a really, really long time. And plus you get those extra picks if your guy does well in the Rookie of the Year balloting, and maybe they would rather just, since he's already been up. I think Baltimore's probably going to be more aggressive this year than they have been in the past. I think they're looking at their window starting to open. And I think I would think they would be a little bit more aggressive. My problem is I don't think he belongs in that top 100. I think he belongs in the next group that are going around pick 150. And I just can't rationalize taking him over Max Muncy, taking him over Brian Hayes. And I would much rather wait the 50 picks, get one of those guys, or even wait longer, get like a Ryan McMahon. We were just talking about at the top of the show about the Colorado guys and being able to employ them really well on a place like NFBC. I think I'd much rather just wait and get a guy like Ryan McMahon and kind of just play the matchups and play the home park.
It doesn't help that Steamer has him as a top 10 third baseman.
And that's the problem. Steamer's not going to make it any easier. I don't think he's quite there yet. Like, I think he's, and not to mention, like, he had a 24% fly ball percentage in the majors last year. And while it was better in the minor leagues, it was still like 30 something percent in AAA last year. Like, we're not talking about a guy who necessarily is going to hit a crap ton of home runs in Baltimore. And I know he's left-handed, so the park changes they made aren't going to affect him as much as other guys. But I don't know. I don't think he is Bobby Witt Jr. I don't think he is one of these guys who are going to have an amazing, full first season. And so, like, I'm not going to pay that price right now.
Yeah, he wasn't. I mean, against non-fastballs, he really struggled. But what 22-year-old kid wouldn't with that? But like I said, by WRC Plus, he is projected as the 9th best third baseman, just behind Nolan Arenado, just in front of Anthony Rendon. The aforementioned Alex Bregman, number 1. You want to guess who's number 2, projected by Steamer at third base by weighted run? Oh, actually, I'm sorry, tied for first with Alex Bregman by weighted run created plus. Yandy biceps, baby. Yandy biceps. That's at 139 with Bregman as well. So yay, Yandy biceps.
And that's funny you say that, because when I looked at the launch angle of 2 degrees for Gunnar Henderson at the majors last year, I went, man, that's very Yandy Diaz, right? He does hit the ball hard, and he hit the ball hard at the majors, but that is a launch angle that he's going to have to very much change if he wants to be able to tap into that power in this first full season. So I'm not on board with that pick, but there will be a lot of people. I don't think that price is getting any lower than it is right now. I think it's only going to go up. All right. That is going to do it for this episode. Kevin, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Justin. It's always a blast talking baseball, especially with you two guys. Can't wait to see you in person again as well.
Yep, I can't wait. I'll remind everybody where you can be reached on social media and plug everything you do.
Sure. I'm at Hasting Kevin on the Twitter. I am the co-host with Adam Howe of the On the Wire podcast on the Pitcher List Podcast Network, and in season I'll do my Fab article again that will come out probably a day or two earlier this year. It's been on Sundays the past couple of seasons. I'll probably get the article out either Friday or Saturday going forward. I think that will help people get a head start on their Fab, and we'll still get the podcast out first thing Sunday morning, recording that as late as we can on Saturday evening. One thing I'd like to add with our podcast, guests like both of you guys taking time in the first place, let alone late Saturday evenings for the past 2 seasons, is why our podcast can even exist. And thank you to both of you and everyone for that. Thank you so much.
It's an absolute pleasure. You guys even had my wife on prior to the start of the season last year, which was a fun episode to do, her and I. So it's always a blast coming on there and talking to you and Adam. So I'd be happy to come back on this year at some point as well. Definitely go follow Kevin. Kevin is a very, very good player, very humble guy, not even mentioning his 2020 TGFBI overall victory. So definitely make sure you're following his work and following him on that Twitter machine if you are still going through the cesspool that is Twitter nowadays. Jason, reminder of where you reached and what you're working on.
Yeah, no kidding, cesspool. So at Jason Collette, pick your social media platform, whichever one functions to your liking. Instagram, I did sign up for Mastodon. I am on there, and I'm still on Twitter, but it is getting tougher by the day to stay there, to be quite honest, because most people leave. The things I like to do on Twitter are no longer happening on Twitter anymore. They're happening elsewhere. I mean, Jeff Passan's breaking news on Instagram. The dialogue that I like to get, some of the people I like to talk to aren't there. And it's frustrating because I've met a lot of wonderful people on Twitter since 2009, I think it is when I joined, right? But it's honestly, it's tough when a lot of the people that you like to are deciding to take their talents elsewhere. And so I'm kind of staying there, but it is, you've probably noticed less activity for me lately, and it is what it is. But Jason Collette, any one of the platforms you want to find me on, happy to interact. with you and talk baseball. And right now, RotoWire, I'm working on the player caps. I read the George Kirby one word for word, but I think I've done 200 of those, and I got another 25 here, starting with Josh Lowe and finishing with Dylan Moore. So get to start with the Rays and end with the UCF guys. So that works well for me. But it looks like I have a nice batch of Rays players in this one for some reason. I don't know why. But James Anderson's been good and giving me a lot of things. So I've got to work on that. And then I've got a couple of things I've been trying to play out with some pieces in my head I'm going to work on. I'm only working one day this week by day, so I've got some time. But I want to write up a full write-up on Josiah Gray and Kyle Bradish are two pitchers that come to mind. Gray, the non-fastballs are intriguing for me, and I want to see what's possible for him. And Kyle Bradish, when I was writing him up, all I could look at was, man, this feels a lot like Drew Rasmussen with what's there and what the potential. And so, I want to dive into that. And so those are some pieces that I've been formulating in my head that I need to sit down to keyboard and put those things together for RotoWire this week.
And you can reach me on Twitter at Justin Mason FWFB, writing daily pretty much over at Fangraphs already this season. I focused last week on ADP versus steamer projections and some of the guys that are values or fades according to steamer versus their ADP. So I don't know what I'm going to write about this week. It's a short week, so I'll really probably get 2 or 3 articles out there this week. But we shall be recording every Sunday from now on for, I think, a little while, with the occasional break for the holidays and stuff. So yeah. Keep tuned, keep subscribed, give us a rate and review, especially if it's of that 5-star variety. Really helps us out. For Kevin, Jason, and myself, thank you for listening. A fantastic baseball offseason.
Go Commanders, 14-0.